If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out warning, I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters. Whoa, this is real.
The hyphen between African and American is Wyoming wide, Wishing Well steep, Himalayan high, and Grand Canyon deep, long as rambling roads, plantation to ghetto. Long as barcodes on brown flesh, long as 40 acres and a mule been in the mail, long as Confederate flags fluttering over southern cities today. The hyphen between African and American is Wyoming wide, Wishing Well steep, Himalayan high, and Grand Canyon deep, long as rambling roads, plantation to ghetto, long as 56 links last on Los Angeles streets, long as lists of white jurors trying black men accused, long as sentences to San Quentin and Angola fused, long as the serpentine comma between no justice, no peace, long as the explanation point behind the police. The hyphen between African and American is Wyoming wide, Wishing Well steep, Himalayan high, and Grand Canyon deep, long as rambling roads, plantation to ghetto. Long as the Liberty Bells crack, long as the Statue of Liberty spikes, long as watch hands waltzing in circles, long as promissory notes held 149 years.
So we want to welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. And just, my name is Jasiri X. I'm a hip hop artist and activist, originally from the South Side of Chicago, based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm honored to be moderating this panel on police terrorism, mass incarceration, and the criminal injustice system. There you go. Okay, so we're trying to get, it's tight up in here, but thank y'all for coming. And we have a really esteemed panel, and we're excited to have a forum and a place to discuss these issues. So to the panelists, since we don't have microphones, you see I'm kind of in my hip hop voice and projecting myself. So just be understanding that, you know, especially as people go in and out, we definitely want to project. So I want to just, if we can, you know, starting with you, Uncle Bobby, just have the panelists introduce themselves and, you know, just 1 minute or less, kind of like introduce yourself, say a few words, and then we'll get right into this conversation.
How many of you seen the movie Fruitvale Station? Okay, great. That movie itself was about my family. I am the uncle of Oscar Grant, His mother, Wanda, is my baby sister. Of course, I've become affectionately known to the community as Uncle Bobby. But my name is Cephus, now Uncle Bobby Johnson. Of course, I wasn't truly an activist prior to my nephew being murdered, but upon that time when it happened, I was propelled into speaking about police terrorism, of course, mass incarceration, and the criminalization that has been taking place with our young men across this country. And more specifically, my nephew, because what happened to him was an outright murder, and of course it did anger me, but also he was criminalized as if he was the one that perpetrated a crime or actually brought harm to some person, but yet he was murdered. And so today, I speak about this issue in hopes to bring families together so that we can, make this more visible to our society as a whole, so that we can begin to bring about this change that we need so that our young black and brown men can actually have a opportunity to true life. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Carl Dix. I am a longtime revolutionary activist, a representative of the Revolutionary Communist Party. My activity began back in the Vietnam War when I was part of the largest mass refusal to go to Vietnam. They called us the Fort Lewis Six. Did 2 years in Leavenworth Military Penitentiary. Came out fighting ever since. I co-founded the October 22nd Coalition to Stop Police Brutality, Repression, and the Criminalization of a Generation in 1996. I co-founded the Stop Mass Incarceration Network with Cornel West in 2011. And we have proposed and are moving forward on a month of resistance to mass incarceration, police terror, repression, and the criminalization of a generation for this October, a month of varied resistance, all targeting mass incarceration and all of its consequences. I'm going to speak more about that, and I'm going to invite and challenge all of you all to be a part of that month in this panel here.
Good afternoon. My name is Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. And my father's name was Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. He was a 68-year-old retired United States Marine and corrections officer who was shot and killed in White Plains, New York by White Plains police officers when he inadvertently triggered his life aid pendant, which he wore around his neck. I just simply say that I am here today, and I'm honored to be here today. And I've met all of these people, and although we have bonded and become great friends, unfortunately it was through tragedy. But as I tell people, that if I can do anything now on this front line to prevent the next Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. from happening, then I'm here to do my job and do whatever I can to help out.
I'm Ron Davis. I'm the father of Jordan Davis, the young man that was killed in Jacksonville, Florida for loud music. What's more American than 17 and 18-year-old kids going to the mall during a holiday, window shopping, and trying to talk to girls? That's what American kids do. That's what my son and 3 other individuals did, and they came and stopped at a gas station on the way back, and the individual came up to their car, drove up next to him and said, "I hate that thug music," because it was hip-hop, it was rap music, and he profiled the children. When his girlfriend went in the store, he continued to roll down the window and harass the children. When the other child came back out of the store to get in the car to drive away, this man, Michael Dunn, couldn't even wait 10 seconds for them to leave. He decided, I'm going to get my concealed weapon and start shooting at this car. He shot 10 bullets at this car and killed my son Jordan Davis, shot him 3 times. As the car was pulling away, trying to get away from the bullets, he ran to the back of his car, got into a police stand, and shot a couple of more shots at the car. And said in court that the only reason he stopped shooting because he had 5 more bullets in there was because they were out of range. Then he wants to plead stand your ground. And that's why my fight and Lucy McBath, Jordan's mother's fight, is against stand your ground and also mass incarceration of our youth and our people of color and mass incarceration of everyone that's in America. I've taken on a lot of fights since Jordan's death because that's how I decided to heal, because I couldn't understand in America.
You can do it.
Migrant.
You can do it.
They want to kill their children. And we can't let America be that way. We have to stop it. People out in California are suffering today. People going to college getting shot down in the streets. I will fight with all I have for Jordan. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm a call-in response girl, so good evening.
Good evening.
Before I introduce myself really quickly, I wanna just share how humbled I am to be in this space and to be sitting up here with these extraordinary people. If you ever want to know or understand what power looks like, what power feels like, all you have to do is sit in this room and listen to what you just listened to. And I want to also challenge you. This is not just a panel where you will hear people speak about the injustices that are happening to our children, to our people in this country. This is an organizing space. This is a movement building space. This is an opportunity where we talk about not just about what's wrong, but what we need to do to change it. What I do right now, professionally specifically, is I work around death penalty abolition, putting an end to the death penalty and preventing executions. Who I am, though, as an organizer, is someone that wants to destroy state violence, wants to confront power. The power that leads to our children not making it home, whether because they're getting killed in the streets, sent to prison, and dying one way or the other. So I'm really honored to be here and have that conversation with you all. So thanks.
And last but certainly not least, fresh off a performance at the Universal Zulu Nation Picnic, right? Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Hakim Green. I'm from the rap group Channel Live. I'm founder of an organization called 24 Hours of Peace, which is a community-based, for-profit organization that works a lot with Roz Barack out in Newark, New Jersey, with the New York Anti-Violence Coalition out in Newark, New Jersey. And 24 Hours of Peace represents hip-hop's organized movement to express peace, love, unity, and safely having fun. So we look to touch young folks in a real way using hip-hop culture, character development, critical thinking, conflict resolution is kind of what we do in a real way. So that's who I am, and I'm here to serve in any capacity. I'm honored to be a part of this panel, but ultimately we're here to serve the community. And so yeah, that's why I'm here.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is kind of, jump around, but really ask everybody on the panel kind of questions individually, and then hopefully we get into, we'll get into a space where we'll open it up for questions and have a real dialogue. I agree with Thenjiwe. I think this is a space where, we come together to really look for solutions to the issues of, we understand police terrorism, mass incarceration, and the criminal injustice system exists. now we begin to ask those questions or have this space to say, what do we do about it? How do we fight back? And how do we make sure that we get justice for all? I'd like to start with you, Mr. Davis, if I can, just because, you know, your case was really the most recent. And just wanted to know, as far as, you know, your family's reaction to the verdict. And then, I guess, what's the next steps? I guess the question as to whether or not Michael Dunn will be tried again was kind of on the table. So can you kind of give us what was your reaction to the verdict, and then kind of where are we at right now with Michael Dunn's trial?
Okay. The verdict was actually unfulfilling, even though they found him guilty of attempted murder on each of the other 3 kids in the car, which is a minimum mandatory of 20 years per child, so that's 60 years mandatory. So he's 47 years old, so that's life unless he's walking out of there at 107 years old. But the state of Florida didn't find him guilty or not guilty of killing my son Jordan Davis. It was a hung jury. And what hung the jury was this. In the self-defense statute, there's stand your ground, jury instruction. And it's kind of like if you are in a class such as this, and we talk about 100 things. And at the end, we say, well, we want you to all be in classroom number whatever, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes. The last thing that you remember about this class is that what we told you the last 5 minutes of the class. Well, we had this trial for over a week. And the last thing that the jurors heard was jury instruction by the judge. And he told them about stand your ground. Even though stand your ground was not filed, because no defense attorney in his right mind will file for stand your ground when he has to lay his cards or her cards on the table, because you do it in front of the prosecutor. So if you don't get stand your ground, they know what your whole case is all about. So what they do is they pretend and they talk about stand your ground. But nobody, even in Trayvon Martin's case, they never filed for stand your ground, because they know in the back of their mind that stand your ground instruction is going to be part of self-defense. So all you have to do is claim self-defense, and before the trial is over, you're going to get that stand your ground instruction anyway. And that's what we have to change. We have to amend that rule. The other rule we have to on the stand your ground is this. You don't have a duty to retreat. I don't know where in America that makes sense when you have 2 people that are opposing each other, no matter what the argument is, for the government to come between those 2 people and say neither one of you have a duty to retreat. Go ahead and shoot each other, kill each other. And there's a victor and a victim. So Michael Dunn is the victor, so he thinks, and my son is the victim with the hole in his chest, laying on the ground. And what they come up and do later on and say to the jury, what was in the shooter's mind? Did he have a reasonable fear? My son doesn't get to testify. His family doesn't get to testify. All you do is ask what the shooter was thinking. And you base your opinion off of what the shooter was thinking, which makes no sense whatsoever. In addition to that, had anyone else walking in that gas station got hit by a bullet, do you realize that when they claim stand your ground, that innocent bystanders, when you're hit, it's called collateral damage. You and your loved ones, if you die because 2 people are confronting each other, it's collateral damage. And as long as they rule that that person stood their ground and was not negligent in standing their ground, you cannot be tried in a criminal court for the other 2, 3, 4, 5 other people that get killed. And that's what people don't realize about standing your ground. Just like when he shot in the gas station, either one of those bullets, 10 shots could have hit a gas station. The gas station is there, people are pumping gas. He's shooting 10 bullets in a gas station. Had he blown up the gas station and claimed stand your ground and won, none of the families cannot prosecute in a criminal court. And also, when you get stand your ground awarded to you, your family cannot sue you in a civil court. Understand that. They take away all of your rights as a family member. In our particular trial, he got 60 years so far. They still have not sentenced him. They're waiting for the retrial on the one charge of first-degree murder for my son. And The defense attorney has withdrawn from the case. They have a new public defender now, and they're going to take their time about it because they're not really getting paid for it. And they will not sentence him until the retrial because the judge that sentenced him does not want to dress down the defendant in front of the court as they always do, and then go for the retrial and then have to be impartial at the retrial. So we as a family, we have February that we got a guilty verdict, and we have to wait probably until the fall to get a sentencing on Michael Dunn.
Wow. Well, thank you for your dedication, your family's efforts. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing with us. I want to come to you, Mr. Chamberlain, because what happened to your father took place in New York. But we were talking about earlier about the fact that it took place in Westchester County, and which provides, I guess, some a more unique strategy in terms of kind of bringing the community together. Can you just talk about what's going on with your father's case, as well as some of the difficulties that you face organizing against police terrorism in a community like Westchester?
Well, one of the things that I always tell people about Westchester County is that you are dealing with a different type of animal out there. It is one of the richest counties in New York State. A lot of the money that is made down in Wall Street, those people live in Westchester County. That's where they reside at. So when you're trying to get community activists, more prominent activists, I'll say, to come to Westchester and help in this fight, it's a very difficult thing to do because there's some type of conflict of interest there that they won't speak to, but we're not dumb. We can see it. Now, in my father's case, from the moment that he was killed, and let me just say from the beginning, as I said, he inadvertently triggered his life aid pendant. When law enforcement officers arrived at his apartment, they banged on the door. He came to the door and he said he was okay. They demanded that he open the door. He refused. There was no crime in progress. You were responding to a medical emergency. So, and the person inside the home said he was okay. So where was the urgency? What was the need to get inside? This is the question that we've asked over and over again and have gotten no response. For over an hour, they would bang on the door. They would mock him, taunt him. They'd mock his military service. At one point, my father says, "I told you I'm okay. I didn't call you." You hear one of the officers say, and excuse my language, "I don't give a fuck, nigga, open the door." So at that point, my father says, "You're a racist." To get to the end, they eventually take the door off his hinges. They fire an electronic taser at him. They fire a beanbag shotgun at him 4 times. And then they fire 2 rounds at him. I apologize.
No, I know the pain.
The commissioner immediately says the killing was justified. That my father was the aggressor, that he attacked the officers with a knife. The autopsy report showed that the bullet made entry in the upper part of my father's arm, which would indicate that his arms were down by his side. So, how was he the aggressor? You took the door off the hinges, you entered his apartment. He didn't come out into the hallway and attack you. It took the city of White Plains 5 months before they even gave my family their condolences. And they did it by signing a letter and emailing it to me. They didn't even give it to me in person. The DA finally conducts an investigation. She comes back with no true bill. No indictment in the killing of my father. When they asked her about the racial slur, she said yes, the racial slur was used, but it was used as a tactic to distract Mr. Chamberlain.
Oh, stop.
No outrage from elected officials or anything on that. Even our black elected officials out there had nothing to say about that. So, moving forward, we have filed a civil suit, but the Department of Justice is also looking at it for possible civil rights violations. And my family has been permitted to move forward in the civil proceedings, which means now my attorneys can ask the tough questions, they can ask the hard questions, and anything that they say in the civil proceedings can be used against them criminally. I personally believe that the Department of Justice is going to come back with an indictment, but it is hard to rally the troops, for lack of a better word, out there. If I look at the level of support that I get out there, out of 100% of people, 85% of my support base is non-African American. Now, on the one hand, that's good. But on the other hand, our own people, or my own people, are not coming out and speaking out against this issue of police misconduct. I've been told, and I was speaking to Jasiri about this earlier, that people look at this fight that I'm in, and I was even told that I'm bitter because they came back with no indictment in the killing of my father. I told them, I said, a bitter person doesn't do anything. A bitter person just complains. He doesn't look to affect any type of positive change. I am at your common council meetings. I am at your legislators' meetings. I am organizing. I am rallying. I am bringing other families who I've joined with to come out there to help me, so they understand that, yes, while this is a national issue, you have to fight it locally. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't have stand your ground up here, but we certainly have a DA who fails to indict. She hasn't indicted a police officer since she's been in office. So if I take that back, she did for time theft. Okay, she did do that. But on the real issues, especially with our elected officials, when you talk to them about coming out, speaking out, or you ask them what is their position in questionable police shootings, what is your position in oversight of these law enforcement agencies, they simply tell you that they trust and believe in the justice system. And they hold the DA in the utmost confidence and believe that the DA will do their job. Well, Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. in Westchester County, Samuel Cruz in Westchester County, DJ Henry in Westchester County, all killed by police officers. And there was a failure to indict in each one of those when the evidence suggested that there should have been an indictment. So we're just still standing on the front line. And yes, it's very difficult. But one thing that I tell people, when your pain turns to passion, you don't let anything stop you. You do whatever it is you feel you need to do. And this is why I say I will continue to stand on that front line. And yes, it's hard standing there and having to relive it or having to speak about it over and over again. Or as I was telling Uncle Bobby, sitting in a courtroom and listening to people talk about your loved one like they are garbage, like they're nothing, and they don't know this person. But again, you have to keep it together. And we as black men, we're already perceived to be anti-law enforcement anyway. We don't like the police. Well, I always say, and I'll say it here too, that I have not now nor have I ever been anti-law enforcement. We need laws, but we need them to apply to everyone, not just some of the people.
So real quick, I don't know if anybody knows how to turn this thing off, this projector off. But if you're in here and you have an idea on how to, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to turn this projector off. Maybe we can pull this up. I don't know. All right. Thank you. We gotta ask for some help. What?
Back on.
Back on again. I don't know what. It wants to go back on. Well, thank you, sir, for your help. I want to come to Uncle Bobby. many people here saw the movie Fruitvale Station, and kind of, you know, felt that pain and that hurt. Definitely not to the extent of you and your family, but you know I was very moved by the movie. But one of the things it didn't show was the organizing that took place in the wake of Oscar's killing, that actually led to the first police officer in the history of the state of California to be indicted for murder. Can you? Absolutely. And you mentioned, you know, you weren't an activist per se, but you began to take this leading role. Can you just talk about, you know, that transformation from you as, you know, becoming this activist, and kind of how you were able to put together a coalition that did get those results?
Let me first ask, is everyone, those that are not familiar with what happened with Oscar Grant, just raise your hand. Okay, so we have a couple. So I'll just kind of give a background quickly. On January 1st, 2009, Oscar Grant was riding the Bay Area or BART train in Oakland, California. There was allegedly a fight on the train. An officer comes up on the platform. It just really, you have to see the movie, not just see the movie, go to the Oscar Grant Foundation and actually look at the transcripts and look at the actual videos that was taken to get an idea of how important it is to know how this system and police officers can react to certain word choices that are used, because it was alleged that it was a black, basically, and a Latino gang fight. Anyway, this officer comes up real hostile. Eventually, my nephew was thrown on the ground. You heard, I believe it was Kenneth Chamberlain say that there was racial epithets used in his father's case. Well, Oscar, excuse my language, was called a bitch-ass nigga twice before he was thrown to the ground with 600 pounds of officer on his back, his arms pinned underneath his body. The officer, Tony Peroni, switched his knees because he actually cracked the bones in Oscar's face. People don't know this, but the bones in his face was cracked because of the pressure that was being pushed on his face and his neck. He's squirming, saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. As Tony switches knees, Oscar is able to put his hands behind his back to be handcuffed. Johannes Mesley stands up, shoots him center mass in the back. Bullet ricochets off the ground and also goes back up into his chest, opens up a lung. You know, he dies later in the hospital. Wow. So, that's the background. But what happened after that, I always say, is the resurrection that is critical to know. Because it was the community that embraced us as a family, that stood with us, that went back and forth to court with us, that cried with us, and even utilized the First Amendment right to speak to that very issue. And I like what Cornel West said, because it was an overlap. You had atheists, you had anarchists, you had Muslims, you had Christians. You just had, you know, folks out there that felt what they saw in this video was an unjust and that they wanted something done, and everybody was speaking the same language. We felt Oscar needed justice. So all these overlaps took place, the community came together and began to organize. There were many different coalitions, many different organizers, all seeking the same thing but not joining forces. We had a town hall meeting and noticed that these different organizers needed to come together so we could talk about strategy and how to get this. And of course, we created what is called a community council. And this was the leadership of the different organizations that was involved in this movement, where we all began to think alike and together and began to move this agenda forward in order to get justice for Oscar. So that was the beginning process of getting the first officer. I mean, this is historical. It wasn't a victory, but it's historical to understand. It was the first time in California state history that an officer was charged, convicted, arrested, and sent to jail. Now, he only got 11 months, even though, I mean, this is what's critical. And we heard jury instructions from Ron Davis. The jury came back, you came back with a guilty verdict on involuntary manslaughter. Okay, slap on his face. But also you came back with a guilty verdict of the gun enhancement charge. In the state of California, that's an automatic 10 years. So we knew without a doubt he had 12 years at the minimum to do. Like Davis family, we had to wait almost 6 months before we actually got sentencing. On the day of sentencing, Judge Robert Perry claimed he erred with his instructions to the juror on the gun enhancement charge and took it off the table. He had to do that to keep him out of prison. So he decided to take the fall as if to protect his officer. He did that. Of course, he gave him double time served for each day in jail, which reduced his time down to 11 months. In order to go to prison, you got to have a year plus. So now he got it down to 11 months, and he puts him in LA Men's County jail hid out. We honestly don't know if he even did the whole time in jail. But the fact is this, is that it was the community coming together, standing together, and working together to make this happen. And of course, most critically, was the video. Had it not been for no video, none of us would know who Oscar Grant is today. He would have been just another young man, as we hear, that was criminalized in that courtroom. He was dehumanized. I mean, everything that you can do to make a person look bad and hurt the family was done in that courtroom. And so it's so important that we realize that this criminalization that's taking place across this nation when it comes to young black and brown men is given justification on a wider span for this murder to continue. And we have to speak to that very issue, because the worst taste in our mouth was that. It was one thing him being murdered, but now you're telling me that my nephew was murdered because of what he did? And if you watch the video, he didn't do anything.
Right.
The movie really didn't give all the true justice to what the officers did on that platform. But if you read the transcript, you will come clear to understand that what happened to Oscar on that platform wasn't a result of his own fault. He was compliant, he did everything that was required, and he consistently asked for peace, and he let the officers know he had a daughter. Don't tase me, I got a daughter. His very last picture before he was murdered was a picture of Johannes Mesley with that taser in his hand. The first statement out of Johannes Mesley's mouth was that he thought Oscar had a gun. He probably would have walked if they would have stayed with that. He felt threatened in the fact that he thought he had a gun. But they fabricated this mistake with the taser, and people don't know the state of mind that he was in, but we do, because he had a history. Mm-hmm. This officer had 4 altercations with young black men prior to the murder of Oscar Grant. Mm-hmm. But the jury weren't allowed to. That information, we have a peace officer bill of rights, especially in the state of California, that's been padded, that you cannot know nothing about the police officer's history and his personal folder. Therefore, if the jury is not privy to that information, all they get is the fact that what he thought might have been the situation.
Wow.
And if he alleged that he felt imminent danger, he had a right to kill.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Yes,
for sharing that. Real quick. If you could just hold on to that. So, I mean, I think it's important that you all sharing your stories to know that this isn't some isolated thing that's just happening in one place or another, or it's just Florida, just here. But this is really a systemic thing. I want to come to you, Thenjiwe, because we were just in Chicago at this Amnesty International conference, and one of the issues that were brought up was the police torture in Chicago. And I kind of want you to talk about it, because I think it's a story that, in my opinion, has not got the attention that it should. When you talk about, specifically, we talk about John Berg and the hundreds of people that he documented, that he tortured or beat confessions out of. Why was it important for Amnesty International in Chicago to kind of bring up that specific issue and do a protest and rally around it?
Sure. And I want to start by talking about the word torture, because a lot of times when we talk about police violence, police brutality, we often don't use words like torture. We don't use words or terms like domestic terrorism. But when we look at what happens in communities across this country. It mirrors what we've seen our country do outside of this country. You know, in Chicago, what you have is a situation that we all know, right? The John Bergs, or at least many people know about it. This is an individual, this is a commander that authorized and ordered police officers under him to take individuals that were accused of a crime, take them off site, strap them down, and would electrocute them for hours. This has been documented and proven. And this is not just hundreds in Chicago. We're talking about, he was commander, he was in this position from 1973 till I believe around 1991, that he was in a position of power that allowed for these individuals in Chicago to deal with what amounts to torture. But that's Chicago. If we study across this country, even in cities like here, like in New York with Kimani Gray. Who's heard of Kimani Gray? Killing of Kimani Gray. This is a young brother, 16 years old, on his way to a Sweet 16 party. And we talk about the criminalization of black and brown bodies, and stopped. The first act of violence is when a young person, when a black body, when a brown body cannot walk down the street without being identified as being part of some sort of criminal activity. And then what happens? He is shot and killed. What do the police say? He had a weapon. He had a gun. What does the community say? He didn't have a gun. His hands were up. He was pleading for them to stop. He was pleading for them not to take his life. Now, he was shot at 11 times. He was hit about 7 times, took it in the body. Most of those got him in the back. Now, Kimani Gray, his last words were, he was pleading. He didn't want to die. If anybody knows anything about the NYPD, anything about the LAPD, anything about any sort of police departments across this country, pleading with officers will get you very little. And I believe with my whole heart that Kimani was crying out to us. So just like many of these cases, and we can go on and I can talk, we can talk about Kiam Livingston. They let her die in a booking cell. She was having seizures for 7 hours. And she died. We could talk about Chantel Davis. We could talk about Rukia Boyd, shot in the face. Her family is sitting at home watching the television screen, hearing about a 22-year-old girl that just lost her life. And her brother is sitting there crying, emotional, praying for the family of the individual who just got killed by the police. Next thing you know, he gets a knock on his door. Too many of our people, too many of our families are getting knocks on doors, telling us that they have killed another one of our children. The bodies are piling up. So anybody that tells me that this ain't some form of terror or terrorism, please tell me what is.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to come to you, Hakim, because you mentioned, the work that you did in the successful campaign of Ras Baraka, and I found out about him through you. You organized a lot of artists to come and support him, as well as the work that you do in the streets of Newark around the 24 Hours for Peace. So I want to talk to you. One, that's a success. Because we talk about building political power, and a lot of times we see voting and politics as a way to really have like systematic change. So from you, sitting in a position where now the mayor of Newark, and he's a good friend of yours, is that the first step to making systemic change and what's happened on the streets in our community? Should we be organizing to take political power like you all did in Newark, New Jersey?
I want to first say, to that, I learned from Daruba bin Wahad, which is another story of police brutality. He taught us that, politics are local, ultimately. Like, our true power is in local politics on the grassroots level. I think that Ras Baraka is an excellent example of what happens when grassroots community come together and organize and work hard for political change. But you know, our fight is local. You know, it's about communities building themselves up. But there are a lot of I guess long-range goals that we're going to have to see on a national level for us to really be able to affect the kind of change that we want to see. We need a national coalition, but those national coalitions have to be rooted strong in their local politics, in their local communities. So I think Raz is definitely a great example. Chuck Lumumba down in Mississippi was a great example. Rest in peace. There's a lot of bright spots, a lot of bright points around the country. We just have to do a greater deal in pulling together a national movement so we can really see things change. Dhoruba, though, is really interesting. For those who don't know who Dhoruba Ben-Wahad is, a former Black Panther who was a part of the Panther 21 case. He was eventually tried and convicted of the murder of a police officer, which he was then exonerated from after 19 and a half years when his lawyers were able to discover 250,000 FBI documents targeting him as a part of the COINTEL program. When you see his history, and then to think that just last month he was accosted and violated by the police in Clayton County, Atlanta, thrown to the ground, body slammed. This is a man that's 70 years old as he's moving into his home in the middle of the day, but it was videotaped. Cops lied. Lies are exposed on tape. So I think what's going to happen with Dhoruba in Atlanta is going to be it's a waking call for the rest of us, that we have to be, we have to be on our game. We have to organize. We have to come together. A lot's going to change in Clayton County, I would assume, knowing Dhoruba Ben-Wahad. But we have to affect that change across the entire nation, really the entire world, when you think of USA imperialistic tendencies around the nation. So to your answer, we have a lot of work to do on the local level, but we need to organize across boundaries. So I'm glad that you assembled a panel that represents our struggle across the nation and not just one place.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Now that goes right to you. You told me to call you Carl. I almost called you Mr. Dix. I'm sorry. goes right to you, Carl, because that's what you're talking about. You've done work for years in New York City and mainly here, but now you're talking about a national movement against mass incarceration, against police terrorism. Talk about this month of resistance. Yourself, Cornel West, and others have become to put together to possibly be a national model for us to begin to push back against these systems that are still terrorizing our communities.
Yes, because you heard these three stories, and we have to understand that these are three of thousands of stories, because 313 black men were killed by the police in 2012. And that's how many we could find out about. Not how many the government told us about, because they won't tell us how many they've killed. And that's just black men. That doesn't count Latinos. That doesn't count white people.
How many did you say?
313. That was 2012.
Is that nationwide?
Nationwide. The Stolen Lives Project documented 2,000 cases of loss of life at the hands of the police between 1990 and 2000. The majority of them were unarmed and in the commission of nothing wrong when they were killed. And almost none of the cops got prosecuted. The key link in this is criminalization. And that's what ties it together with mass incarceration, because they have criminalized black and Latino youth in this country. 2.2 million people are in prison. They are there not because they are criminals, but mostly because they have been criminalized. Jobs have been sucked out of the inner cities of this country. Laws have been passed, and the job sucking is by the very operation of this capitalist system. Laws have been passed that target black and Latino youth. Policies are enacted, like stop and frisk, that targets black and Latino youth. sentencing disparity between the drugs used in the ghettos and barrios, crack cocaine, and suburban drugs like powder cocaine, 100-to-1 disparity. 5 grams of crack would get you the same penalty as 500 grams of powder. I'm about to tell, I was about to go to that. A big change was made by Obama. It is now that 90 grams of powder cocaine will get you the same penalty as 5 grams of crack. And to borrow from Malcolm X, they stuck the knife deep in your back, then they pulled it out some, and we're supposed to be glad.
Call it progress.
My own thing is, you stick the knife in my back, even if you take it all the way out, I'm still mad at you for sticking it in there in the first place. See, and we have to act on that, because this mass incarceration is like a slow genocide targeting Black and Latino youth. I don't have time to break this down, but I'm not trying to hype it. This is a case that I can prove, and I have done it. In a talk, I'm going to give you where you can go online to find it. Vimeo.com, that's V as in Victor, Vimeo.com/37254933. That's 37254933. It's a talk I gave called Mass Incarceration plus Silence equals Genocide. It breaks all of this down. But literally, tens of millions of people in this country have their lives caught up in the criminal injustice system.
Can you repeat that site for us one last time, please?
Vimeo, Vimeo.com/37254933. This is unacceptable, and we have to stop accepting it, and we are making a move to do that. Cornell and I called a campaign around Stop and Frisk 2.5 years ago, which helped to thrust that more into the conversation and helped to lead to putting it on the defensive, although you got to keep hitting that because they will do it under different names and different guises. But now we're moving on to mass incarceration overall. We are aiming for a month of varied resistance to mass incarceration. Coordinated nationwide demonstrations on October 22nd, which is the National Day of Protest to Stop Police Brutality. Sermons in churches, mosques, and synagogues in the month of October. Panels and symposiums on college campuses, and high school for that matter. Cultural expressions, concerts, spoken word events, poetry slams, all of it targeting the injustice of mass incarceration, activities that will assemble thousands and even tens of thousands of people and impact millions, because we want to change the way people look at this. This is not a system of, that is working to keep society safe. It is a system that has criminalized large sections of society, warehoused them in prison, racially profiled them to get them on the track to go into prison, and then treats them like less than full human beings when they get out. Because there's all kinds of rights you lose by having been in prison, which then means reintegration in society becomes even more difficult than it was the first time around. So we're going to target all this, and October will not be the end of anything. It's going to be a springboard for moving forward, but it will be a leap in the resistance. We passed around the call for the month of resistance. Everybody should have gotten it. If you didn't get it, get
Right
with
here.
us. Okay, there's Boban getting them out. We want to enlist you in this because it should be unacceptable to anybody to see this going down. And it's very important that there's a united resistance. Black people, Latino people have to stand up and be a key part of fighting this. But look, if you're white as white can be, and you know it ain't gonna happen to you, you gotta fight it too, because
That's right.
You should be ashamed to have this go down and be told, oh, we're doing this for you. Because they're actually not doing it for you. They're doing it for their capitalist system and to keep it in effect. So they play in you too.
Yep.
Don't go for it. Don't fall for it.
Thank
Join
you.
us in standing against it.
Thank you. So I want to, and this question is for you, Mr. Davis and Uncle Bobby, because I think one of the most powerful visuals that we saw was, you know, your family standing with Trayvon's family together, and that unity. I know recently you all had an event in Florida where, you know, Jonathan Farrell's family was there, Marlon Brown's family, Uncle Bob was telling me Emmett Till's family. You know, I remember being in Oakland, I think it was a few years ago, Uncle Bobby, where you all organized an event, and it had to be maybe 16 to 18 mothers that were there that had lost children to police violence. Can you both talk about just, you know, the families uniting and coming together? Because for me, that's something that I remember, like, people being isolated. To me, it's new to kind of see these families coming together and unity and forming these coalitions. Can you just talk a little bit about that strategy?
The first thing, because there's a lot of families that call me, text me, and they ask me, they said, well, how did you get so much publicity about your son? Because Jordan was not an extraordinary kid. He was my extraordinary kid, just like your babies. You know, your kid is the best. Your kid is everything he does. Your nephews, your grandkids, they're the best, you know. And that's what Jordan was. He wasn't, you know, the Michael Jordan of kids or anything like that, you know. But what happens is that you have to get the community, first of all. When something happens to your loved one, get the community behind you. And the first thing I said, I think the first couple of interviews was this, because people, they'll try to take your train and drive your train for you. And that's the first mistake that people make. And, you know, and bless his heart, Reverend Al Sharpton had Marcus Coleman call me a couple of times, and I kept telling him, I said, Marcus, I'm 61 years old, I'm a grown man. I can speak for my son and I can speak for my family. So don't let other people drive your train. You know, you drive your train. That's what you do. Like this guy here, drive your train. You know, because if it goes off the tracks, you can't blame anybody but yourself. Okay? So that's the first thing. And the next thing that came out was this. Because somebody white was racist against my son who was black, that is not an indictment on everybody that's white. I don't want, anytime I speak, for somebody that's white to feel like I'm talking about them. I'm talking about one man that did a horrible thing to my son. Because if a black man holds you up and shoots your family member and you're white, I would hope to God you wouldn't indict me because I'm black. And I tell people, stop indicting a race of people because of what some individual does. And that's the first thing about community and standing together, is looking at everybody and understand that they cry for you. These people in here will cry for me, and I'll cry for them. And in my community, which is 65% white, they cried for me. They allowed Jordan to be a national news story. They put him on Jet magazine. They put him in Ebony magazine. Barack Obama had the White House call my house and said, we want Mr. Davis here, My Brother's Keeper initiative. Because he saw the way that we as a family got people together. Because anytime you separate people, you're not going to be successful. And I'm glad to see a mixture of people here. And when we talk about black folks and how we have to do things, we're not separating ourselves from you. When this gentleman Carl was talking, what we're trying to say is we've done so many things in the past to keep us from doing what we need to be and to be equal in society and be visualized equal, that we're trying to let everybody know that we have so much to do for ourselves as Latinos, as black African Americans, that we say we need you to help us by marching with us. So many times you see marches, what do you see when a black kid dies? You see mostly black people marching. Now, but when you go to universities, it's a mixture. Because for some reason, people white don't think that they can march with black people. But yes, you can. When they had the civil rights struggle and Dr. Martin Luther King, there were white people right out there struggling, fighting with Dr. King. Jews were getting their head hit by rocks and stones, getting bit by dogs when Bull Connor were down in Selma, Alabama, and all these places. So you can march with us. When you hear about Carl saying in October, we're going to have a day of protest, that's not just black people having a day of protest. That's white people, that's Latinos, that's Asians having a day of protest. Because you know what protest is? Is when you think something is wrong and you want to do something about it, that's protest. It has nothing to do with the color of your skin and the texture of your hair. You know? That's what protest is. That's protest.
Uncle Bobby?
So I say to add to that, On November 5th of 2010, that was the verdict, actually the sentencing date of Johannes Mesme for the murder of my nephew Oscar Gray. No, the verdict date was July 8th. Sentencing was November 5th. 2 days later, on our way from LA, from this bad verdict, Derek Jones was shot in the back and murdered, very similar to Oscar, by 2 police officers in Oakland, California, that had just committed a murder about 9 months prior to Derek being shot. And we felt that we had failed as a family. We went to Chicago on February the 26th. We was at the airport. At that airport, we had just got the news, the 27th, we had just got the news that another young man had just been murdered, but this was a child. We're talking about Trayvon Martin. So my wife and I apologize to my wife, but this is my beautiful wife here. That really helped engage these mothers. I mean, because a teary-eyed mother, when I see my,
Take your time.
it's nothing more painful than seeing a teary-eyed mother that had lost her child, especially if it's her only child, maybe her only son. It's nothing more painful than that. But to hear Trayvon Martin being murdered, we knew we had to go. And I remembered how the community embraced us, loved us, prayed for us, walked the court with us, and fought for us. That helped give me some strength to stand up on our own. And we knew we had to embrace this family because we understood the pain that they were going to be going through. And it's from that point that we realized that this is not no isolated situation where these families need to walk this walk by themselves. So we run wherever we can, if we can get there, to embrace this family and help this family. And just recently, Ron Davis was there, we were there, the Emmett Till family was there, the Jonathan Farrell family. You know, we could go on with the family names, but they're here on this shirt just to embrace this one family because we know it's strength in numbers. And it's so critical that you as a community embrace that family that you know that has suffered this type of harm, this terrorism. I mean, because it's nothing worse. And it may help that family get through to be able to stand on their own. And this is how we're hoping to build a national movement from that. Families embracing one another and helping that family overcome that traumatic experience. You know, and so we ask that we all become brothers keepers. That anytime you see a young black, brown man, or even a white man being accosted by the police, take a moment out of your life.
Yes, yes.
Pull out your camera.
Yes.
Stand at a safe distance. Videotape that, because that type of evidence, just like Hakim was talking about down in Mississippi or
Atlanta with
Atlanta, yes. I mean, had it not been for that, had it not been for you doing that for us, we wouldn't have made the history that we made. The movie wouldn't even been made. So it's just, you know, I hope I even answered. You know,
You did,
I get
you
really
did.
emotional
You
about
did.
this because it's so important. I mean, it's nothing. I mean, if you could just walk in our steps and understand a teary-eyed mother, not just a mother. You see us crying.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that was my nephew.
Yes.
We had a close relationship. I can imagine my father being killed that way. Or my son. I got a son.
Yeah. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. I want to come to you, Hakim, because, you know, and you briefly mentioned, you know, a hip hop artist from Channel Live, but you know, you really have a far more extensive musical history than that, including, you know, on the management side, including helping put all of these MCs together as KRS-One relaunched the Stop Your Violence campaign. I found out about Mumia through a song that you made, Channel Live and KRS-One, Free Mumia. Does hip hop have a role today in helping to raise this awareness? Is that possible in this current, lens of kind of like the rap industry? And how can we begin to organize artists to begin to speak to these issues that we're dealing with today?
I'm going to start answering that with a quote from KRS-One, hip hop lives. Hip means to know, it's a form of intelligence. To be hip means to be updated and relevant. Hop is a form of movement. You can't just observe a hop, you gotta hop up and do it. So real hip hop is intelligent movement. If it's not intelligent, if it's not moving us anywhere, then it's not hip hop. So when we talk about hip hop, we talk about a culture of expression, a culture of expressing a certain pain that poor people around this country have a way of expressing. Only poor people can express this pain. That's what hip hop is. So I see artists like Jasiri X, Immortal Technique, Rebel Diaz, and many other voices across the country that represent that true voice of struggle, that true voice of revolution and evolution. That's what hip hop is, and there's a lot of that going around across the country, not just in terms of music being made, but there's hip hop curriculums being formed that's educating our young folks using hip hop as a backdrop. You have folks involved in economics and all levels of society, hip hop can be expressed. Myself as an artist, I have a responsibility to use my art in the tradition of a Paul Robeson to uplift our community. That's the fight that I've chosen to fight. My mentor is KRS-One, so that kind of says it all. That's 24 Hours of Peace is born out of the spirit of using our art and our culture to rally people, to organize people. Now, when we talk about rap music, that's a corporate creation that benefits a corporate agenda. It's a different culture in corporate America than in the streets that we call hip hop. Two different things, all right? But even using a corporate mentality, there are millions of people protesting something every single day. They need a soundtrack.
That's right.
So artists like myself and Jasiri and many others, we have a place and a purpose, but we need more conscious PR, marketing, promotions, you guys to come up with ideas on how to utilize our voice. We're just a commercial. The meat that we're selling is right here in this room. Like, you're the product that we're looking to sell. We're the commercial. You guys have to come up with ways on how to utilize us to move the issues forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, man. Thank you. I also just want to briefly mention, we've both been at the table by a mentor, elder, who's actually speaking later on tonight, Harry Belafonte, who has recently begun to call hip-hop artists together around a project called the Sankofa Justice and Equity Project to encourage us to deal with issues like mass incarceration, child incarceration, violence against women. So although he's 87, he's still inspiring, organizing, educating, and pointing our generation in the right direction. So hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit later on today. I want to come to you, Thenjiwe, and then I want to open it up for questions. I remember in the wake of the verdict for George Zimmerman, you were one of the organizers that kind of really shut down Times Square, and to be in Pittsburgh and to see, that group of people, really peacefully organizing but protesting in the wake of that horrific decision. It was incredible to watch. My question for you is how, what happens a lot of times is that moment passes and then we kind of go back, the hoodies kind of came down and we kind of go back to what it is we're doing. Something happens, we get riled up, and then we come back and go back to what we're doing. How can we really begin to organize beyond the moment into a real movement?
I want to thank you for asking me that question. The thing is that it's one thing to want accountability for an individual. There's another to indict a system that perpetuates what we see, what we saw with Trayvon Martin, what we saw with those whose lives have been lost. What we need to indict is white supremacy. What we need to indict is a system that values property over people. It's called capitalism. What we need to indict is patriarchy, so that the sisters that die at the hands of law enforcement or at the hands of someone that sees them as a threat, that we know their names and that we see their faces. That's how we turn a moment into a movement. But we also need to know that we win the moment we don't leave, the moment we decide not to give up. And I think sometimes it's really hard for us. And we don't admit that moment where we feel defeated and we go home and we abandon the families. We abandon the communities that are suffering. We need to remember that it's not that we can win, it's that we will win. Winning is ours, but winning is only ours the moment we decide not to go home. The moment we decide we will never leave these men, these families alone to grieve by themselves. Like, this is beyond solidarity. Like, we're in the business of saying, I know there will be another one. But what is going to be different this time is how I respond to it. We have to do, I think, what we saw, what these men have spoken about doing. We need to stand together. We need to stand united. And we also need to know that the moment that we decide that change is necessary enough to put ourselves on the line, the moment we make that decision, we will begin to build a movement that no power structure, no government, no entity in this country, in this world will be able to stop. And I believe every moment we're making that decision. I believe in this room we're making that decision. I believe when you see these powerful but beautiful men talk about not giving up, finding justice for their loved one, we are inspired. We know that we're going to win. But we also have to be rooted in love. I think sometimes we forget that we are here because we love our people, because we love our community, but because we love ourselves. And without that love, there's a moment where it gets too hard and you go home. We have to start loving ourselves in a way. Radical thought breeds survival, spiritual survival.
Thank you. Mr. Chamberlain, you want to speak to that?
Yes, I just kind of want to piggyback what you were just speaking to. I think that one of the main things that I say to people, especially in Westchester, is I just ask them a very simple question. What would you do if it was your loved one? Would you stand up? Would you speak out? Would you look for others to come stand with you because you can't do this by yourself? It's no way. I'm sure that if I spoke to each person that has experienced the loss of a loved one this way, we all can identify with not being able to sleep at night, sitting up 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, all these racing thoughts. You may not be an attorney, but you're trying to figure out ways to fight this system and give it to your attorney. Hey, did you see this? Or I saw that. These are the things that I do on a day-to-day basis. I don't sleep. I literally fall asleep at about maybe 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm back up at 4:30, 5 o'clock. Some people say it's not healthy, but I try to eat right. I take my vitamins. But, I mean, as Jasiri and I was speaking to earlier, I have to look at Jordan as being my son.
Yes.
I have to. You have to look at Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. as being your father, your grandfather, your friend, somebody who you truly care about. And I think one of the most hurtful things that I think about at that time is I say, wow, my dad was 68 years old. He wouldn't hurt a fly. He couldn't at that time. And I think one of the things that hurts me the most is that I literally lived 5 minutes away from where my father lived at and had no idea what was going on.
Wow.
And it hurts because I feel like the one time that he really needed me, I couldn't be there. I couldn't save him. The police officers literally tortured him. The audio is on YouTube, and I always tell people, you type in Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. audio, and I tell you, I challenge anyone in this room right now to listen to that audio and tell me that you do not hear misconduct and murder. Most people who have listened to it have even sent me emails, and all they simply said was, oh my God, why didn't they leave that man alone?
Right. Right.
That's what they say. My father gave his testimony on that audio.
Yeah.
Where you will hear him say, my name is Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. White Plains police officers are going to come in here and they're going to kill me. Did the building come out when this happened? No. They were too afraid to come out. And I said that maybe if my father, if people inside that building had come out, there's just a chance that he may be alive today if people get involved. But
Yes.
you can't walk away when you see something happening to somebody because you're just as guilty as the people that are committing the offenses. And as Ron said, you know, it's not an indictment on white people, not at all. Because I am also good friends with Ron Thomas, who's Kelly Thomas's father, who was beaten into a coma by police officers in California.
Right.
We're very close. We speak all the time. So, and then you have a case right out here in New York. What was it? Ehud Halevi, the Jewish young man that was beaten by police officers as well. So we know that this is the system itself that has to be changed. So we know that reform is needed. And that's why in Westchester County we are definitely pushing for that. Independent prosecutors in questionable police shootings, not allowing police departments to investigate their own officers, and not having a DA's office who works closely with that department overseeing the investigation. We know that those are all inherent conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
And lastly, all I just want to simply say is that how can we be expected to abide by a set of rules or principles that law enforcement themselves do not abide by?
Absolutely.
Different principles or standards for similar situations we know is a double standard.
Yes.
It's a form of hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
So my thing to them is I always say practice what you preach.
That's right. Thank you.
That's it.
And he said, there is an attorney, Angela Corey,
Lord.
that was the prosecutor in the Trayvon Martin case.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you how strange this really is to me. She prosecuted that case, let him walk by overcharging. Then she prosecuted the Marissa Alexander case and want to give her 1 million years for shooting a warning shot. Now she's a prosecutor of my case, And when we went behind closed doors, I said, listen, charge him with second-degree murder. Because first-degree murder, you have to prove premeditation. To a lawyer or a judge, premeditation could be a matter of seconds. But to the layperson that's going to decide my case, the juror, who may work at Walmart, gas station, Kmart, whatever, wherever we work, they're not lawyers. They don't know the law as much as the lawyers know the law. When you say premeditation to the normal person out there, they think you either went home and got a gun or went to your car and got a gun. That's premeditation. 10 seconds is not premeditation to our ears. So when you charge first-degree murder, which involves premeditation, I said to her before the trial, you're going to get a hung jury. She said, Mr. Davis, I've been doing this a long time.
Lord, have mercy.
I said, well, you know what? I've been looking at cops a long time, and that doesn't make me an expert.
Show you right.
You know? That's why they took this show off. All they showed was people of color in handcuffs. That's all I saw every day when I looked at cops. She said, it's not going to be a hung jury. We got a good jury. I said, you have a good jury? I said, what did my son look like? Did he look like me? Yes, Mr. Davis. I said, do you see anybody on that jury that looks like me? 12 people. Not one looked like me. Trayvon Martin's jury. 6 jurors. Not one looked like Trayvon. That's 18 people.
Oscar Grant.
Oscar Grant. Did not look like Oscar. I said, what you think is equal and fair is not equal and fair. She said, well, I don't want to talk about it anymore. And I said, you know what? I said, you better not talk about it anymore, because when you have a hung jury, come see my face when you have a hung jury.
Wow.
Because you charged that. And so after that trial, when I went back to the conference room, and she didn't know what I was going to say to the media, she saw my face, and she bursted out in tears and ran to her office.
Wow.
I said, because I told you, just like I told you before, when you have jury instruction, and you tell them to go into the mind of the shooter, whether they thought that they were in danger, whether they thought they were in fear of their life, people on the jury cannot take that and understand that. They can't see in the mind of a shooter what they think. They have to look at the testimony and the facts. Because when we're in court, you look at the testimony and the facts. His own girlfriend, who was in the car with him after he shot my son and murdered my son, said, we went back to the hotel, he said nothing of a weapon. We got back in the car the next day after we saw on television he had killed your son. Nothing about a weapon. Drove 2.5 hours on Interstate 95 down Florida. Not one word about a weapon. Now, if some kids were shooting at you with a shotgun, don't you think you would have said one thing, that there was a weapon?
Absolutely.
He not one thing. There were witnesses. There was a gas station. It was lit. How much more evidence do you want? He didn't have a hair touched on his head. He actually made contact with the kids by rolling his window down twice. They never touched his car, and he lied and said Jordan Davis had a shotgun and was trying to kill me. So while he's standing over me with a shotgun, I reached into my glove compartment, quick as I could, and shot him. And they said, well, what was Jordan Davis doing while you were doing all that? Just sitting there with a shotgun, looking at you. Didn't make sense whatsoever.
Absolutely.
Then when the medical examiner said, well, Jordan Davis was shot in the leg and in the chest while he was in the car, he said, well, maybe he jumped back in. So with a full-blown shotgun, he jumped back in the car while you got your gun and shot him.
Right.
So no matter how many lies you tell in court, how many facts you put in there, you still don't get justice. You know? So I say to you that I don't know how to change the law whereas you are represented by incompetent people. No matter how much money you have, and you have to understand that this is a strange thing in this country. If you're a billionaire and you're a defendant, you get the best lawyer in the world to defend you. Am I correct?
That's right.
If you're a billionaire and your loved one dies, you cannot get your own lawyer in a criminal case. You have to take the sorry state attorneys to try your case. No matter how sorry they are, you can sit up on your $1 billion all you want. You cannot hire your own attorney to prosecute your case, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
You have to sit back and watch the people do it over and over and over again, the wrong thing. In the retrial, the state attorney told me, Mr. Davis, we're going to retry on first-degree murder again. That's how ridiculous this system is. And I'm going to sit there in trial and have to take all this nonsense. And they told me, they said, well, you can't say how good your son was. You can't say anything good about your son in court. Don't you notice that even in Trayvon's case that they could not say anything good about him? They tell you in court. Only the defendant can give you personal things to show how good they were. They showed you pictures of Michael Dunn at a wedding. They showed you pictures of Michael Dunn hugging his kid, but then his kid testified that he hadn't seen his father but 3 times in 15 years.
Wow.
But all they showed you of Jordan Davis was a wallet photo ID, because we can't show and have the jury have a connection with Jordan Davis. The judge told me and Lucy McBath, his mother, before trial, come on in, we want to talk to you. We don't want any emotion in court. We don't want you guys crying in court, and we don't want the jury to look over at you. As a matter of fact, Mr. Davis, we want you guys to sit on the second row. So there'll be somebody in front of you so the jury won't have a connection with you.
Wow, that makes no sense.
The killer's family can sit on the first row, but my son can't be represented. And if you make too much noise in your crying, Mr. Davis, we're going to ask you to excuse yourself. That's how it is. As a matter of fact, my attorney had to get a special motion just to have me in court, because what the defense attorney did was he said the one way to get Mr. Davis out of court is put him on the witness list. And that will get you out of the court because they don't want you to see the testimony of the other witnesses. So we had to get a special motion just for me to sit in court.
Wow.
He didn't even tell the prosecutor when he was going to call me as a witness. They usually tell the prosecutor the next witness, have him wait out in the hall because we're going to call him next. He said, Ron Davis, take the stand. And the prosecutor had no knowledge that I was taking the stand. He tried to get me to be the angry black man, but it backfired. He looked stupid. And you all saw what happened on television. And he objected to everything I said, because I remember Jesse Jackson once said, it's not the question they ask you, but you answer the question you want to ask.
That's right. Thank you.
Jordan Davis.
I want to add to that. Oscar's case wasn't televised. Right, as my wife said, on purpose. The infliction of the pain that was given in our courtroom, only we as a family can tell. Our very first day in court, as you heard Ron just talk about, the judge told us that if we don't make that crowd go away, I'll make this case last 5, 7, 10 years until they all go away. You make them go away.
The judge told you that.
The judge told us that. That's the first day in court. I mean, I can go on about each day in court and how horrible it was, but the middle part of the court, I'm just going to give you 3 quick scenes. They took the silhouette of where the bullet went through Oscar's back to make the argument that he was resisting arrest. The projectile angle was such an amount of degrees, and therefore he was raising up, therefore he was resisting arrest. They took that silhouette and they named it KKK. No rhyme or reason, because normally it's in chronological order or alphabetical order. But he named it KKK and tossed it on the judge's, not the judge's desk, but his desk, and the judge allowed it. Our very last day in court. Now I'm not talking about everything, because it was just as worse. But the very last day in court, And I think you heard Carl talk about this. He said, my God, this is not about black and white. We just gave you a black president.
The judge said that.
This is what the judge said. My God, this is not about black and white. We just gave you a black president. This is what was said in the courtroom. So we know the pain, but what's done behind the scenes when the camera's not in that room is atrocious. Because you can't imagine the pain that was inflicted on us because the media was reprimanded for reporting everything in the courtroom.
Right.
They had KTVU and all of them scared to continue to talk because he was admonishing them.
Right.
Because they was affecting the case of the trial.
So, this is the criminal and justice system.
This is the criminal justice system.
And, I think really, important for us, you don't just vote for president. You vote for DA, you vote for judges, but just to really begin to get involved. I did want to acknowledge Angela Davis, who came in. Thank you for joining us.
Let me say this, and thank you, Angela, because Angela was on the front line with the protesters in the open, speaking to their
So we don't have that much time for questions, but I felt it was important to allow these gentlemen to speak, so we do have some time for questions. If you have a question, yes, sir.
Yeah. So in terms of after hearing all this, we want to organize and help stop police brutality, police terrorism, mass incarceration, and privatization of prisons, and all of those issues. And especially when it comes to whether we're organizing in our own communities or organizing on college campuses or wherever, how would you suggest the best way in which to challenge those things?
Carl, did you want to take that one?
Okay. Let me say two quick things on that. The first thing is bring the reality to your audience. And you can do that in a couple of ways. You can do some basic research, and I can tell you a few places to go for that. One is the Stolen Lives Project, which documents thousands of cases of loss of life at the hands of the police. You can go to Operation Ghetto Storm, which updates from the Stolen Lives Project. You can go to the Stop Mass Incarceration website, which pulls together the activity for the month of resistance. That's one thing. Another thing you can do is bring some of the voices. And there are activists, they're parents of police murder victims stretching back to the 1990s. You can contact the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, and we can connect you with families in your area. You can bring people who can speak from the direct experience. There are also family members of people in prison who are increasingly organizing now, because there had been a real stigma and a real shame. Somebody gets arrested and people will say, oh, he's visiting, he's out of state, because they didn't want to admit that their loved one was in prison. But now that people are seeing how broad this problem is, they are now no longer viewing it like, because I went to a demonstration recently, and people whose relatives were in prison had missing signs saying, my husband is missing, my son is missing, because they're getting the sense that someone is coming into these communities and stealing these people. It's not something that we should be ashamed of. It is something that we should indict the system for.
Excellent. Thank you.
You can invite organizers like me, but I will tell you, if I come, I will tell you this stuff is built into the fabric of this capitalist system, and it's going to take revolution, nothing less, to end it once and for all. And whether you're with me on that or not, we got to stand together and fight. And I will bring that revolutionary message.
Thank you.
So just be forewarned that if I come, I'm not talking about revolution.
You knew.
You didn't expect
You knew beforehand. Thenjiwe, you want to touch on that too?
Yeah, I wanted to speak more specifically when you see folks being terrorized, right? So the first thing is to not leave them alone. That's a tactic for not just to support efforts to ensure some level of safety, even though that doesn't always help. But there's a humiliation to the ways in which law enforcement engages with our community. And so for folks that live in New York City and you're going into the subway and you see they've pulled over another young brother or sister, and then they have them standing there, and then they handcuff him, and he's just standing there. And what do people do? They look at them and they keep going. And we can't leave our children alone anymore. The second thing is that we have to start documenting. So there's documenting in sort of organized patrols like Cop Watch. Who's heard of Cop Watch patrols? Like, we need to start organizing and patrolling our community. We need to be just as organized as our enemies are. And I'm using the enemy word intentionally. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to stop playing around with what's happening in our communities. We just have to stop. You know, when we go outside and we see what's happening in our communities and our hoods, like they have declared war on us and our kids, and the time for leaving our children alone has to stop. And so we need to stand with them, but we need to document what's happening. But the next is that we need to have meaningful discussions and dialogues around the fact that our judicial system isn't broken. It works the way it's supposed to. It works to destroy, and the only answer is to destroy it.
So I want to, thank our panelists for your honesty, for sharing. Thank you all for coming. If I can, I would like to we started with, some culture. I like to end with some culture, if you all don't mind. They say, Jasiri X, you preach too much. I'm like, black people, we asleep too much. A black president, but he doesn't speak for us. Another black body lynch is not unique to us. Meanwhile, Kanye's rocking Confederate flags. Jay-Z and Barty's going half on sweaters and bags. It's not their fault. It's ours. All we measure with swag. They getting money, get money. What's better than cash forever and last? Riding in Berettas and Jags, but don't crash. If you do need help, don't ask. Cause all Renisha got was a shotgun blast. Just for knocking on the door, left rotting on the floor, half her face gone. But no one was locked up like Akon. Black life comes with no insurance like State Farm. Race wrong. Black people, better put your brakes on. End up on that strange porch, end up as a stained corpse. Different city, same sport. It's not an accident if you hit the witness you aim for. Bullets left a face torn. Victim of a race war. Make a brother hate more. Show up at that same door. Let that 38 roar. What will be my fate, Lord? Death from an officer who I ran to thinking to help. He won't offer up. 10 shots to the chest stretched. Now they chalking up. Another black man looking fresh in that coffin or being to my ribs cracked. Rolled up in the gym mat. Blood on my kicks match. Police say I did that. No crime. The kid's black. Case closed. Cash is shut. But take his organs, fill it with newspaper and patch him up. Now tell me if that BS is matching up. I know we just want to see her twerk it, then back it up. But that's what happens when we make our rappers leaders, and our most intelligent just want to be on TV featured, and they give reality TV shows to preachers, and we think activism is Facebooking and tweeting. 12 years a slave, we still fighting for freedom. Just look at the headlines, seeing is believing. Strange fruit, but now they cock it, aim, shoot, yeah. Strange fruit, but now they cock it, aim, shoot, yeah. Strange fruit, but now they cock it, aim, shoot, yeah. The end result is just another slain youth, yeah. Renisha McBride, she got a name too. And Jonathan Farrell, he got a name too. And Kendrick Johnson, he got a name too. And Jordan Davis, he got a name too. And Kenneth Chamberlain, he got a name too. And Oscar Grant, he got a name too. I pray to God that we never name you. Thank y'all.
If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning. I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out a warning, I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters. Whoa, this land. Well, if I had a bell, I'd bring it in the morning, I'd bring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd bring out danger, I'd bring out a warning, I'd bring out love between my brothers and my sisters. Oh, this